Hi, my name's Jay Howie, and if you're like me, you like to mess around with sounds. And have you ever had two amp heads that you want to run through one cab? Well, today I'm going to show you my two favourite ways of running two heads into one amp and blending them together to create some really cool sounds. So one of the reasons that you might want to blend two amps together is because you like the tones in both amps and you want to blend them together and send them through one cab. So the first process I'm going to go through is called amp stacking. So when we think of amp stacking, we think of gain staging. So you probably would have heard the term gain staging in relation to pedals, overdrive and distortion pedals, and the way that you set them up on your pedal board and how we can turn one or two of them on top of another one to create different tones and get different textures. Now we can do the same thing with amps, and this goes back to the 70s and stuff like that, where they didn't have things like overdrive pedals and distortion pedals to create their sounds. They got everything from an amp. So what we're doing is we're running this Marshall into this orange and then the orange into this 4x12 Marshall cab. And what's happening is we're using the preamp and the power amp of the Marshall to drive the preamp and the power amp of this orange amp into the Marshall cab. So you could think of this Marshall as potentially an overdrive pedal, but an amp. There is one important piece of equipment that we do need when we're doing this, and it is a load box. That's what this is up here. This is an old Rivera rock crusher. As you can tell, it's quite old and big. You can get smaller ones these days, such as torpedo capacitors, aux boxes, things like that. And these are extremely important. So when we're running an amp and it's not going into a speaker of any sort, we need something to take the load. So we need to run it into a load box so that we don't damage our amplifier. So the way that I've got this rigged up is I'm running my guitar straight into the front of the Marshall, and then from the Marshall we're going into the load box. Now on the load box there's a line out. So we're going from the line out of the load box and we're taking that into the front of the orange. And now we're running our speaker cable from our orange into our speaker cab. So that's the wiring for this setup. So let's hear how that sounds. So as you can tell from listening to that, this Marshall is really pushing the front of this orange, and it gives it that really big, fat, dirty 70s rock sound. It sounds amazing in my opinion. And the other beauty of having this setup is that we can EQ both preamps because we're running both preamps. So we can blend our EQs on both the amp heads to create even more texture throughout our sound. So now that we've talked about amp stacking and how that can affect our tone and make it really, really versatile, I want to go over amp slaving, which is the second type of option for running two heads through one cab. So amp slaving is similar to amp stacking, except we're removing one of the power amps and we're removing one of the preamps to create another sound. Now the reason that we might do this is because we might have a 50 watt power amp, which is what this Marshall is, and we want a bit more wattage. So this orange is 120 watt. So we'll use the 120 watt power amp from the orange and we'll run the preamp from the Marshall. So the way that we set this up, and we're very, very fortunate in this day and age to have effects loops. You won't be able to do this on a vintage amp, I don't think. But the way that we run this is we go straight into the Marshall, and then again we want to run our Marshall into our load box so that we don't blow it up, so that it's got a load on it. Now, this is a reissue Marshall with an effects loop on it. So from the send of our effects loop, we go from the send of the Marshall, and then we go into the return of the orange, and then from the orange straight into the speaker cab. So now we are running the preamp of the Marshall, and we are running the power amp of the orange, and we're running that into our 4x12. So now we'll have a listen to what that sounds like. So as you can see, the tone when we just use the preamp of the Marshall and the power amp of the orange is quite a bit different to what it sounded like when we stacked the two amps together. So this is a really cool concept, because if I wanted to run my Marshall through a different power amp that uses completely different tubes and get a completely different sound, it's possible for me to do that. And I really like the fact that I can do that. It gives me a lot more versatility in my sound and my tone. So that's how we slave an amp. So those are my two favorite ways of stacking two amp heads into one cab. I love both options. I think it gives you a lot of versatility in your tone, and I really hope that you enjoy mucking around with it. And just remember that you do need a load box. I don't want you damaging your amplifiers at all. Thanks very much for watching. I'll have a link below to my Patreon page where you'll be able to get the diagrams. Plus I have a lot of tabs on there. And I have a whole bunch of stuff. If you want to keep supporting my channel and supporting me, head on over. If you just want to have a look around and don't fancy it, that's all good as well. Thanks very much for watching.